Thank you. Well, I think we're having the last session of a 3-day HLF, which is in its 10th year. So first, I congratulate the HLF for reaching this milestone. And, December, January is the season of LFs around the country. And now there are 11 cities in India which are competing with each other for literary fests. But my experience over the last few years is that most of these are more festivals. There is less literature and less literary and more of festivals. So I want to go back, and that's why I said scholarship in the time of politics. I want to go back and revisit the whole idea of a literary festival. The whole idea of a literary festival is to get authors to speak about their books. And not to forget, to get the audience to buy those books. Those are the two primary purposes of a literary festival. But in the last decade or so, every literary festival has been hijacked by political issues of the day. And they have become occasions for literary personalities to pontificate on issues that they know very little about, in which they're really not directly concerned with, but which are dominating the public headlines. So you would have seen recently the entire Calicut Literary Festival, Kozhikode Literary Festival, got hijacked by one remark of Ram Guha, that the people of Wayanad made a mistake in electing Rahul Gandhi. Now, what that has to do with the literary festival, I am yet to figure out. But it's these types of interactions that I think cause political convulsions. And in fact, the first literary festival to start in India, the Jaipur Literary Festival, there are people in the BJP who think it's a Congress festival. There are people in the Congress who think it's a BJP festival. I think these are literary festivals, and therefore, what I want to underscore is that literary festivals must remain literary festivals. You must discuss books, you must discuss literature, and not CAA, NPR, and NRC, and what this author or that activist thinks about these issues. There are other forums for discussing those, but I think what India is lacking is serious forums where the world of books, the world of literature, in various areas, both fiction and non-fiction, get discussed. Now, we are living in the age of competitive politics. There is no question about it. But we had a generation in India of scholar politicians. Gandhi was a scholar politician. Nehru was a scholar politician. In fact, the greatest scholar politician that India has produced is Ambedkar. We look upon Ambedkar really as a political leader, but the scholarship that Ambedkar put out is just absolutely awesome and amazing. And that too, he produced it in the most difficult of social circumstances. Jayaprakash Narayan was a scholar politician. Rajaji was a great scholar politician. So India is heir to a legacy. There is a legacy. There is a generation of political leaders who managed to straddle the words of scholarship and politics. I grew up, and I'm sure many of you of my vintage would remember, I grew up reading the Ramayana and the Mahabharata of Rajaji. And those are evergreen classics. And Rajaji is seen to be this great political figure, but his greatest contribution to Indian life, in my view, lies in his Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So I think we must not look upon the world of scholarship and the world of politics as two distinct worlds which never intersect. And I think more and more people in politics must get involved in the world of scholarship and vice versa. Politics is a dirty word. In my view, politicking is a dirty word. Politics is not a dirty word. In fact, in my view, politics is a noble profession. Politics deals with distributional questions. Politics deals with questions of equality, of fraternity, Politics deals with issues of livelihoods. Politicking, on the other hand, is something that we all would not want to appreciate, but which we all know goes against the very spirit of fairness and equity. So I, for one, although I am firmly, I have both my feet planted in the political sphere, I have never seen myself to be outside the world of scholarship, and I have always tried to bring the worlds of scholarship and politics together so that scholars of various varieties understand what drives politics, and people in politics understand what makes the world of scholarship tick. Now, we are a democracy. We all believe in the freedom of speech, but very few of us have the patience to listen. Now, democracy based on a freedom of speech and impatience to listen is no democracy. We talk, but we don't speak. We hear, but we don't listen. And this is not true just in the outside world, it's true in parliament as well. People make speeches and leave. But parliament, ultimately, a process of debate is a process of listening, is also a process of speaking. So I think we all of us, have to take consolation in the fact that we have a constitution. Certain freedoms are enjoined upon us, but those freedoms really come with a whole set of responsibilities. The freedom of speech comes with the responsibility to listen. And I think this is one big characteristic of the public discourse that somehow has been lost in the cacophony of competitive politics. The political debate has become so surcharged, and it's become so binary in nature that it is impossible to navigate the middle path. It's impossible to take a position without getting branded as being of one ideology or the other. And I think, as we discussed in the morning, ultimately what should matter are facts. But we seem to be the only country in the world where opinions are sacred, but facts are always in dispute. And I think it should be the other way around, actually. So we have to rediscover the art of debate. Amartya Sen called us the argumentative society. Debate has always been part of Indian civilizational traditions. Skepticism has always been part of Indian plurality, has been always part of Indian philosophical traditions. In fact, certainty has been an alien characteristic in Indian civilization. The ancient Upanishadic saying, when the young student asks the Guru, what is truth? The Guru doesn't say this is truth. He says neti, neti, neti. Not this, not this, not this. And basically he's telling you, find out truth yourself. Not this, not this, not this. So certitude has never been part of our civilizational ethos. Skepticism, the spirit of questioning, the spirit of inquiry has been fundamental to Indian culture. And the reason why Buddha became Buddha, and the reason why Buddha created such a revolution in Indian thought and ultimately had to be exterminated from the Indian body system is because Buddha said, don't believe in God, don't believe in me, don't believe in anything, but find out for yourself. And I think it's that spirit that scholarship imbibes. It is that spirit that people, both in the world of scholarship and politics, have to learn to imbibe. We live in an age of great certitudes. All the issues that we discuss are open to multiple interpretations. Multiple interpretations. Truths are different. And so I think we need to recapture the spirit of the dialogue, the spirit of dissent, the spirit of debate, which means give and take. And this is true in parliament, it's true in legislatures, it's true in public life, it's certainly true in literary festivals. And I, for one, would encourage the Hyderabad Literary Festival to accommodate as many divergent points of view as possible, but not to provide a political forum to these divergent points of view, but basically to provide a forum for authors who have expressed these divergent points of view through works of fiction and non-fiction as well. So with that few words and a request that we go back to the literary part of the literary festival and we really get true authors speaking not about their political views but about their works, that we should go back and really make the Hyderabad Literary Festival a festival with a difference. Otherwise, it will become one more of the literary festivals that dot the calendar of India in these 2 months of a year. But I do want to congratulate Manthan. I want to congratulate the HLF for the surroundings in which we are having the HLF and the menu that you had of menu of authors and topics. And I'm sure that the first decade has been good. The second decade will be even better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. This was a brilliant set of remarks. We will have about 20 minutes of Q&A, and maybe I'll take the prerogative to begin myself by asking the first question. Sir, I also wanted to speak. You mentioned about Dr. Ambedkar, Nehru, Gandhi, etc. In their times, the medium of communication was relatively simple. Either you wrote articles in the newspapers, or you wrote books, or maybe you wrote letters, which at some point in time saw the light of the day and others benefited from it. But today we have multiplicity of medium. So how does that influence the manner in which you communicate and the kind of the essence of points and also the attention spans of your intended audience and viewers, etc.?
Well, it's true that the medium has become the message. It's true that the medium has overtaken the message, and very often you judge a message by the way the medium packages the message. But I think this is a very intellectually lazy argument that we all tend to give ourselves. Oh, the media has changed. Today we are living in the world of instant communication. Those days were different. Those days were the days of books and long letter writing. Today is the era of 140 characters. Well, 140 has become 280. So 280 characters. This is the era of social media. I think that's true. I mean, that's the objective reality. But there is simply no substitute. There is simply no substitute for rediscovering the value of books. There is simply no substitute for rediscovering the value of scholarship represented in literary works, both fiction as well as non-fiction. And I think it's a long haul, I agree. Markets have changed, people have changed, generations. There's been a generational shift, and the younger generation is demanding a more instantaneous form of communication, and they don't have the patience to read books which are beyond a certain size. But I think we have to soldier on, and the challenge before authors, in my view, is to provide readable fiction, readable non-fiction, but in a time in which the modes of communication are constantly evolving and constantly changing. I'm now seeing novels coming on your smartphone. I'm getting works of history. In fact, there is a publishing house in Delhi called Juggernaut, which specializes in publishing books, which you can read on your smartphone. Obviously, you're not going to read 700-page tome on a smartphone, but there is still a place for serious literature. There is still a place for serious works of non-fiction. And I refuse to believe that modern media is going to drive out all good works. I know in economics, there is Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good money. So bad media drives out good media. But that's true only for a while. I think ultimately we come back and the equilibrium will get restored.
Thank you, sir. So let's start with you, Sunita Reddy Garu. Those who want to ask questions, please be ready.
In turbulent times, I think every forum should be used to express political views. But that is my personal opinion, and maybe you have a different opinion on that. But my question is, how do you divorce politics from literature, from when the only books that are being published are all political? I'm waiting for my favorite authors, Amitav Ghosh, Arundhati Roy, Vikram Seth, and all of them to write. But who is, I mean, there hasn't been anything recently. The only books that have come, are being published. As a moderator in HLF, this is the 4th year that I have moderated political biographies. There is nothing of interest in literature. There's mostly all of it is politics, and then a discussion, a moderation on such books generates public opinion, which is again all political.
It's very important that when you write, you are able to distance your political ideology from what you write. Arundhati Roy is a wonderful writer. She has to be read, not necessarily believed. Uh, you know, uh, so you have to be able to discern what the ideology. There is a very clear ideology, which I don't subscribe to most of the time, but I read her because she's just so beautiful in terms of her writing and the imagery that she's able to evoke. Even if she is debating and discussing something which is completely at variance with facts. So I think authors owe it to their reader to make their biases as transparent and as clear as possible. I People have always asked me, uh, how is it that you're able to be in politics and write about political issues? And I tell you, it's not difficult. If you just have the discipline to say that my commitment is only to facts, my commitment is not to ideology A or personality B, then I think you will achieve what you set out to achieve. It requires a lot of self discipline and it requires self confidence to say, I have the facts, so what if I am critical of the Congress party or if I am critical of Nehru or Indira Gandhi, which I have been. But the facts are facts. You can't quarrel with facts. So I think authors have to be a little more honest with themselves and not take readers for a ride by imposing their ideologies on the readers.
Yeah, so just to build on the argument this lady has brought in, and also with your kind permission, to differ a bit in you, because you said that we need to separate the literature with the politics. What's wrong if we have both of them? Because the scholarship can also be, uh, going to come through these discussions, and it's also the reflection of the times that we live in, and that is what the projection is. And I don't see that there is anything wrong if we have politics and scholarship together. That is the times in which that we live, and the climate is asking all of us.
No, I
Do
think
so.
you have to be very clear then. You have to be very clear and you have to make your biases and your ideologies very clear. I, for one, believe that when you're writing, and I have not written fiction. I've written I write only non-fiction and I write only political and economic history. But when I write political and economic history, I make a very conscious effort not to allow my biases, not to allow my prejudices, not to allow my likes and dislikes to impinge on what I am going to write. Why should I? And I think that intellectual self-discipline a writer must have. Of course, everybody has an ideology. Everybody has a philosophy. But when you're writing for a larger audience. You're writing. What are you writing for? You're writing to communicate. You're writing to advocate. You're writing to actually convey a message. And I think, in all fairness, the reader has a right to know where the author is coming from, what the bias is, what the background is, what the prejudices are. And I don't believe, after my morning session, young Rohit Day came to me and he admonished me, said, I don't agree with you, sir. Historians have ideologies. I said, yeah, historians have ideologies. We have left-wing historians and we have right-wing historians. But do we have historians grounded in scholarship in India? No. Let me tell you, the one scholar who was grounded, the greatest historian that India has produced, in my view, in today's language, would be called a Hindutva historian. If today he were to say, Jadunath Sarkar would be considered to be the guru of Hindutva, because he's the guy who, wrote about Aurangzeb, he wrote about Shivaji, he wrote about the Marathas, he wrote about the Mughals, he wrote about the Rajputs. But if anybody were to go back and study Jadunath Sarkar's life, it was a life in the archives. It was a life in scholarship. Nothing that Jadunath Sarkar wrote was not backed up by some documentation in Persian, in Arabic, in Bengali, in Marathi, in Sanskrit, and in English. That is scholarship. But today, Jadunath Sarkar is considered to be a right-wing historian. And right through the 50s and 60s, all historians got Padma Bhushans and Padma Vibhushans. Poor Jadunath Sarkar never got a Padma Award. Never got a Padma Award. That's what I mean by saying that if you impinge ideology into the world of scholarship, into the world of history, into the world of science, I think you're doing history and science a great disservice. And I'm a member of the JNU court. Since JNU is in the headlines, I might as well give you some information. I was a member of the JNU court. And I went for the first meeting, and this crazy vice chancellor was speaking about his vision for JNU. And so at the end, I got up and I said, Mr. Vice Chancellor, I've listened to your vision. You're replacing one form of tyranny with another form of tyranny. That's what you're doing. And my plea to you is, please, in this process, don't abandon your commitment to scholarship. Because ultimately, what JNU has to do is produce good physicists, good chemists, good economists, good social scientists. And not people who are left-wing or right-wing, or people who think that Marx was great or Vivekananda was great. So I think it is possible to have your own ideology, but divorce your scholarship from your ideology. You look skeptical, but I'm telling you, it is possible. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm afraid that the longer you speak, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, the more questions you create in my head. Okay. One, I'll start with the latest, what you just said about historians and history. You're emphasizing a scholarship as a kind of study and knowledge of facts. But I will remind you of a brilliant work of art by the great filmmaker. It's called Rosherman's Gate, where a certain incident, which involved 3 people, was then being investigated, right? And the 3 players are asked to give the truth about what happened. And the whole film is about 3 entirely different versions of what happened. And these were the protagonists. So I think that fact in itself, and you often quote from Indian philosophy, as we know, is not this, not this, not this. So that's one thing about fact and history. The other thing is, and I'm not going to go on longer, but I just say that I think every work of art, whether it be a painting or a novel or a film, must be grounded in ideology.
Must be grounded in ideology.
Because I don't think I'd be interested in a work of art that speaks on any sort of neutral terms and claims to be factual.
Well, I mean, let's agree to disagree on this. When I see a building, I would like to say this is a great architect. I don't want to say that he was a left-wing architect or a right-wing architect. When I see a great big painting, same thing. When I read a book, I would like to say this is a wonderful written book, or this is a wonderful book of history, or this is a great book in science. Unfortunately, today, that judgment is being replaced by ideological judgments. And that's, I feel, doing grave disservice. Because what passes off as scholarship, many instances, is ideological pamphleteering. And ideological pamphleteering of the left and the ideological pamphleteering of the right. However, I have to say that the ideological pamphleteering of the left is more grounded in scholarship than in the right. Because And there is a reason for that, because the center in the 50s and 60s was the left. The center of gravity was the left. So the best historians, the best physicists, the best social scientists were all left of center. But 30 years from now, will they continue to be left of center? I don't know. Because society's values have moved from being progressively left of center to somewhere in the center and somewhere even right of center. But it's true that India has produced fantastic left-wing historians, is not produced one credible right-wing historian. Although Jadunath Sarkar could be considered a right-wing historian, but he's not, in my view, a right-wing historian. He's a historian. India has produced many left-wing economists. Mahalanobis was a left-wing economist, but there's been never right-wing Mahalanobis. So, but that's because political climate, intellectual climate in India, and not only in India, but in other parts of the world, was that the left naturally attracted the best intellectuals. Is it still attracting the best intellectuals? The question, I think, is remaining to be answered.
I'm Kalpana Mohan. I really appreciate what you said about literature festivals being about literature. I just wanted to say that last year, this is my book, last year I published this book. It came out of Bloomsbury. It's a memoir of the last 3 years with my father before he passed away. And this is a book, Chennai is a character in this book. And my father lived and died in Chennai. And it turns out that the Hindu Literature Festival would not see this book for the value it had. Instead, it featured Shweta Bachchan, who was peddling her chicklet in a 1 hour or 2 hour evening event. And all I want to say is we do need to dissociate money from festivals. And I was wondering what you'd like to say about that.
I entirely agree with you. Shweta Bachchan has no place in a literary festival. And literary festival is about authors. We should be showcasing, well-known authors. We should be showcasing upcoming authors. And if I may use a loose expression with apology to my friends who come from outside India, I'm not a chauvinist, I'm not a jingoist, but I've been to literary festivals where I see more Goras than Desis. Literary festivals, I have yet to go to a literary festival in India that showcases young regional authors. I've yet to go to a literary festival which gives pride of place to translations. I've yet to see. I've yet to go. I have always, and I am the first to acknowledge this, that we should, of course, English literature is very important, writing in English is very important, but why not the best Telugu books in literature? Why not the best Telugu books in political science? Why not the best Telugu books in economics? I think we should make an effort, and not enough effort is being made in that direction because the sponsorship, unfortunately, is for the English. It is not for the Hindi, it's not for the Telugu, it's not for the Urdu, it's not for the Kannada. And I hope that Hyderabad is in a position to make that change because this is, in my view, the most cosmopolitan city in India. It's cosmopolitan in language, it's cosmopolitan in religion, it's cosmopolitan in culture, and therefore you are in a position to be a different lit fest than other lit fests.
Just to supplement, sir, we do have a language in focus every year. This is Malayalam for this year. We had Gujarati last year and then Bengali the year before, Tamil, Telugu. So we do have sessions, but we do take your message that we need to promote more regional languages as well. Please go ahead with your question.
Good evening, sir. My question was about how you think of scholarship only as tomes, as you call them, these large, serious, difficult to get through at times formats. So I was wondering whether we should judge scholarship on really the intellectual quality of the output rather than the format itself. For example, I find some of these stand-up comics or even these sarcasm-lined news outlets at onion.com, for example, they have some fantastic, very funnily presented views, which are based on fact, which do spark thought, which to me is part of what scholarship is. Just your thoughts on that, please.
I'm glad you caught me on that. It's not the quantity of scholarship, it's the quality of scholarship that counts. And you're absolutely right. You don't have to produce a tome to be considered a work of scholarship. I'll give you a simple example. Anybody of you interested in the Indian economy and how the Indian economy has evolved, millions of words have been written on this. Big tomes have been written on this by people from all over the world. But in my view, the best introduction to Indian development planning is a slim 150-page volume, the scholarship of which will never be equaled. It is by Shukumai Chakravarti. Sudhir Chitle might remember. It's 1987 Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture. It's called Development Planning by Shukumai Chakravarti. Awesome scholarship, but only 150 pages. So it's the quality of scholarship that counts, and I agree with you. Don't judge scholarship by the amount of pages or the thickness of the scholarship. No, it's not. It's quality, and you can take 1,000 pages to be scholarly, but you can also be scholarly in 50 pages. And let me tell you, it's far more difficult to be scholarly in 50 pages than it is in 1,000 pages.
We have time for maybe a couple of last questions. So here, what about the elevated people that side? Any questions from there?
It was a treat to hear you, Mr. Ramesh, but I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Right in the front. Yeah. I just wanted to make one point that in all our discussion, I think we must keep the reader in mind. So it is the reader who reads politics in a book, or a reader who reads poetry in a book, or a reader who looks for history in a book. So whether it's whichever author you take up, I think I am able to. Faiz Ahmad Faiz suddenly became famous for one line that he said, or a poem he wrote, but it's the reader who saw the meaning there. In the same manner, I can find it in Ghalib, or I can find it in. So I thought that politics comes into these festivals because authors are there, but they are making meaning for their readers in one way or the other.
I agree with you. I mean, an author depends on readers, but ma'am, with all due respect, author also depends on buyers. Because, the guys who read don't buy, and the guys who buy don't read. So you want, lit fests should not only be for readers, but the oxygen for a writer comes not only from readership, but it also comes from people buying the books. So the Lit Fest is really an opportunity. It's a marketplace. The Lit Fest is a marketplace for ideas, and it's a marketplace for authors and readers. And I entirely agree with you. Never take the reader for granted. In fact, when you write, put yourself in the shoe of the reader and ask yourself, what does the reader want to know? And I think that's a very good principle to be adopted by any budding and aspiring writer.
Yeah, Jairam, I was thinking when we were talking.
Yeah, I saw you.
When we were talking about, what kind of books, ideology not being there, should not be there, only scholarship, etc. The thought that was foremost on my mind is, where would you place an author like Rabindranath Tagore, for example, today? Ideology, scholarship, politics. He's the man who wrote, where the mind is without fear. So where would you place an author like that?
It's a tricky question, but let me say that you cannot judge a work, you cannot judge an author divorced from the times in which the author is writing. Tagore was writing at a particular moment of Indian history. Much of what Tagore writes, much of what Gandhi has written, certainly most of what Nehru has written, is a reflection of the times and the society in which they lived. Tagore wrote at a time when nationalism was creating havoc in the European nation-state system, and therefore Tagore comes across as somebody deeply suspicious of nationalism and propagating universalism and internationalism. Gandhi wrote at a time when the British ruled us, and he wanted India to be rid of this mental dependence on the British, and hence his condemnation of Western civilization, which is there in Hind Swaraj. So I think, writers reflect the times in which they function. And great people like Tagore, Gandhi, Nehru, Rajaji, all these, Ambedkar, reflected the circumstances in which they wrote. Would Gandhi be writing Hind Swaraj today? I have my doubts. How would Tagore respond to today's political debates? I don't know. I mean, these are counterfactual questions. So it's really a pointless political debate to appropriate some icons from the past to support or propagate a current point of view. Those people have relevance in their times. And to say that they would have done the same thing which they did then in today's circumstances, I find that very hard to believe. So, yeah, Tagore had an ideology. Tagore had a universalist ideology because he was reacting to nationalism. Gandhi had a Swadeshi ideology because he was reacting to British colonialism. Nehru had a secular ideology because he was reacting to the growing communalization of Indian society in the 1930s and 1940s. So these are outcomes of historical circumstances. We must not judge people, personalities, independent of the times in which they lived. And to think that they would make the same choices today, I think would be very, very wrong and very counterproductive.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jairam Ramesh, for this brilliant exposition. Not only did you share some very valuable messages for the writers and readers, but also for festival organizers. So something very bold for you to do.